It is a real honor to be here with this group. I started my career, and I see Ken Dewey just walked out of the room. I was going to say in the mid-'90s when I took a meteorology class from Ken Dewey when I was getting my bachelor's here at the university. So I blame Ken Dewey for my presence here today. So he was a big influence on me, as well as my father. My father is a farmer. And he taught me really how to love the environment and love the land and really adapt well with the changing environment. And he's still farming today. He's 86 years old. So that's a little bit about me. As Tyler said, I used to work with Nebraska Emergency Management. I worked with the state for over 12 years. The last 5 years, from 2013 to 2018, I was the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. As John Burridge had said earlier, I work a lot with the NRDs and their mitigation plans. We have 21 mitigation plans across the state of Nebraska. You are sitting in the Lower Platte South NRD mitigation plan. This is their jurisdiction and their territory that they manage the mitigation plan for this area. So that's a little bit about me. Like I said, right now I work with JEO Consulting, and we are really excited about the next round of mitigation plans that we're doing and incorporating the drought planning and resiliency planning into their mitigation work, and really look at climate change and the trends that we are seeing and what we can do better in the future to help our communities and our districts be more sustainable and more resilient. So that's our goal. Real quickly, I'm going to introduce this panel and tell you a little bit about this group. This group is kind of a really cool group. They were brought together based on the fact that they got a grant from NOAA to really look at some extreme weather events and precipitation extremes and how that really affects municipalities. Obviously, that's very fortuitous for the city of Lincoln right now. They looked really intensely at 10 cities. This group is going to tell you in detail about what they looked at and answer any of your questions on that. We are missing one member today. Frank was unable to be with us. He was not feeling well. So unfortunately, since he's not here, I'm going to try and present his information, but don't ask me any questions about it because I am not the subject matter expert. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce the three that are going to be able to participate. Natalie is going to be online, hence why we have the computer up here. And Natalie Umphlett is the regional climatologist for NOAA and the High Plains Regional Climate Center, which is located here at Nebraska in the Natural Resources School here. She serves as the Climate Services Manager and is the liaison for the center, working closely with stakeholders and partners on climate monitoring for enhanced decision-making. She's been at the center since 2008. Right now she's in Georgia. She told me the weather wasn't that much better there, ironically. Tarik is going to be our second presenter. He is with the University Public Policy Center. He's a research specialist. In addition to this project, he has also served on the National Science Foundation funded project on climate change education in the Great Plains, which was an assessment of water planning processes and the impact on the Platte River Basin. And he's also worked on another NOAA project of an interdisciplinary team focusing on the application of the FEMA THYRA process toward drought planning in the Platte River Basin. I was privileged to join him on that endeavor. And then our other presenter, Dr. Tang, works here at the university. Dr. Tang is an associate professor in the Community and Regional Planning program. He is also a faculty fellow in the Center for the Great Plains Studies and the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute Technologies at the University of Nebraska. He teaches hazard mitigation planning, environmental impact assessments, and environmental planning and policy classes. His research covers hazard mitigation planning, environmental policies, and geospatial information systems. So without further ado, we will get Natalie up here and get her going.
Hey Natalie, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Awesome.
Yep, you're up.
All right, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Mary, and a big thanks to Tyler and all the media folks for setting this up so that I can participate remotely today. I really appreciate that. So today, I'll be telling you about different parts of a large project that aims to help cities plan for climate and climate change. And so collectively, the few of us that are here will be telling you different parts of that to help tell the whole story there. So what's interesting about this project is that it actually started about 5 years ago when a group of cities with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network reached out to local climatologists to learn ways to incorporate climate data into city plans. And so the High Plains Regional Climate Center, where I work, we were fortunate enough to be able to work with this group. And this is what I consider part of the original project that helped lay the foundation for the work that we are presenting today. And so here on the screen, what I have is a picture. Many of you will recognize this. This is taken from downtown Lincoln, where the Antelope Valley project is located. And so what I thought I would do, since there's a lot of folks who can't be there today, I just thought I would show our project team. So from left to right, here we've got Martha Shulsky, Zhenghong Tang, Frank Ularic, Tarik Abdel-Monem, and then myself here on the right. And so we've got a good mix of people here. In the middle is Frank with our city sustainability leader, got 2 climatologists, community and regional planner, and a public policy specialist. And so a big part of this project was a workshop that was actually held here in Lincoln back in the spring of 2017. And we pulled together representatives from cities all across this 4-state region that you see here on the screen. And so we have Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska. And we really wanted to get a diversity of perspectives. So we wanted to include cities of all different sizes. So you can see here we had like Kansas City, for instance. But we also wanted to include small cities, like the ones out here in Hayes, Garden City, McCook. We also wanted to have cities involved that represented the gradient across the region in terms of precipitation. And so we have cities over here on the wetter side of the region, and then we have cities in the west and the drier side of the region, because we wanted to capture the range of issues that cities were dealing with in terms of precipitation. And so you can see we had a lot of different experts that we invited out to this workshop. And so this is so we could learn from all different types of people. So city managers, planners, sustainability coordinators, folks from utilities, water development specialists. And we also had partners from the climate, drought, and planning communities in attendance at that meeting. And so it was a great 2-day meeting. We got together, talked about all sorts of issues surrounding climate and planning, drought, and then also had a few focus groups to help us better understand what the concerns were in the region. And so I pulled a couple of quotes out here because not only did I connect with them, but I think it helps tell kind of the story about this region when we think about climate and climate change. Because one thing that we learned is that folks are really concerned about how there's a lot of media attention, this focus on coastal cities, so like on sea level rise or on bigger city. And so some folks felt that, this part of the country often gets overlooked, and that was pretty frustrating for them. And so one participant said, being climate change, looks different. It's drought, it's really ag-based. Even if you are a city, you're thinking about these components. And so this helps drive the point home that climate issues in this region are very complex. The cities in this region are not solely concerned just about themselves. They're not islands, but they're also concerned with the surrounding areas. The economies of the cities are also dependent on the economies of the ag surrounding areas. And so these linkages are really important when we start to think about climate change, and how to plan for that. And then here's another one that I really liked. 42% of people in the United States live in cities under 200,000. So it's great to have the Seattles and the New Yorks of the world, but if we're trying to create models for other communities, that's the size that we should be looking at in terms of scale. And so I thought that was a really good point, because a lot of the climate action plans that you might see or a lot of the tools that are available for cities to use are for these very large cities. And so the question becomes, how do we create resources that smaller communities in this part of the country can benefit from using? And so one of the first things that we did in order to address this from a climate point of view is we developed a series of climate adaptation reports for each of the cities at the workshop. And so these were able to provide an overview of the temperature and precipitation trends, different extremes, and the projections for each of these locations. And we were able to provide these actually ahead of time at the workshop so that we could get feedback on the contents and the style of the reports. Because these reports were meant to be used by a wide variety of people, so not just planners, but city officials or even the public. And so we wanted to make sure that the information was communicated in a way that many people could understand. And so you can see here, it's kind of a typical, report structure. There's some narrative, there's graphs, but we did try to incorporate some other features such as large images, easy to read graphics, color-coded. So for instance, in this example, the wetter parts are green, the drier parts are brown. Seems very simple, but sometimes us scientists don't make the most aesthetically pleasing graphics. So just making sure that these could be understandable and easy to read was really important for us. And then another thing that we tried to do was for the projections part, we tried to incorporate an implications section. So not just the numbers, not just, the temperatures are going to rise by 3 degrees and your precipitation is going to increase by this amount, but what are the implications for those increases or decreases that we'll be seeing? And so what we tried to do was tie the climate projections to sectors like water resources, energy, and public health. And so each of these reports was about 15 pages long. And so for each of the cities, so that was 11 reports for each of those. And all the analyses that were done in the report were actually based first off of municipal concerns. So instead of starting with what climate data do we want to analyze, we started with what are the concerns of the city, and then what sort of climate thresholds would we want to analyze in order to address that. And so this is just a simple chart here. This was actually developed with the original cities from our project that started 5 years ago. And so you can see here, for instance, for stormwater management, that is a concern of cities. And then in order to try to address that from a climatological point of view, we looked at trends in days where the rainfall was at least 1.25 inches or days where rainfall was at least 4 inches, but just to give an example there. Because really, from a climate point of view, we could analyze any sort of threshold that anybody wants, but in order for it to be meaningful to the cities, we had to work together in order to find out what those thresholds were. And so we also wanted to make sure that the information was understandable to a wide range of audiences. And so in addition to just the usual narrative, graphs, charts, we included a full page of a table that provides a quick overview of all the trends for each location. So if I go back here, we did calculate trends for each of these thresholds. So from temperatures, precipitation, snowfall, heating degree days, cooling degree days, that's just a utilities term there, through all the way through, trying to figure out thresholds for flooding, high snowfall events. So all of these were done for each of the cities, but it's a lot to digest if you are maybe a mayor or someone on the city council. So we have these tables that are color-coded and broken up by season so that you could easily assess in probably 5 minutes what your recent changes have been at your particular location. And so you can see here, this is an example for Lincoln. So in the winter, Lincoln has had warmer and snowier winters. And so you can see here, the warmer part is color-coded in red. There were no cooler seasons, but that would have been in blue. And then you can see wetter in green and drier and brown. And so this is just something that folks could look at very quickly, pick up and read when time is short. So we got great feedback on these reports. Many of the cities are using them already for planning and then help build awareness around climate issues. But we know that these reports are only a snapshot in time. And there's a lot more than 11 locations out there that need this sort of information. And so the question became, how do we scale all of this up so that the information can be more current while also serving more communities all at the same time? And so one way is to take the analyses that we performed that were used in the reports and convert them into online tools that any location can use. And so what we chose to do was expand that out to all the states that are in the Missouri River Basin. And so you can see on the map here, this does not have Minnesota actually listed on the map, but it is included. And so what that does is that when we take into account the data availability at the stations in the region and weeding out the ones that don't have long-term records or maybe have a lot of missing data, it ends up being about 800 locations in this region that we can serve through these tools. And so in doing this, we can serve locations that are both large and small because, as one participant said, I appreciate the data if nothing else, just to be able to have a frame of reference when they, council members, make those tough decisions. I struggle trying to figure out how to ever quantify some of these things because it's too difficult for a city of our size to try to come up with a report like this. So, what have we done? Well, we have tried to turn a lot of the research that we've done into tools. And so you'll be hearing some more about what we've done in terms of surveying cities, about their use of data in planning, and then also assessing plans. And so all these different pieces came together to actually build these tools. And I say coming soon because we haven't officially released this web page just yet, but you can get a sneak peek at this link right here. And so we do have these tools live, ready for you to view. You're the first group of folks to get to see this. And so that's just hprcc.unl.edu/climate4cities. And so what we have on this webpage is we have an overview of the project. So if you want to learn more, you can always go there. We also have each of the 11 city reports on there if you want to peruse those. And then we have 4 tools that I'm going to show you quickly. So the first tool that we have is a historical climate trends tool. And what you can do here is you can analyze the trends just like the ones that I showed in that table for any of these locations in that 10-state region. And the fun part is not only can you do this for one location, you can compare to another. And so one thing that the cities told us in our focus groups was that they want to learn what is going on upstream. So for instance, what are the precipitation trends like upstream from them, especially for folks that are living on rivers. And so this is a quick way that you can actually look at the trends. You can choose to put a trend line on your chart or not. It will actually show you the change between the beginning and end points, so you get a very quick trend right there. These graphs are actually interactive, so you can click different things on and off, and then these can all be downloaded as PNGs, JPEGs. You can pop them into presentations, however you'd like to do. We also have projections, and so we have projections in 2 different ways. The first way is that you can actually compare what's called normals. And so for us climate folks, we use that term all the time, and what we really mean is just a 30-year average of temperature and precipitation. And so in this chart here, the green bars, that's going to be your average precipitation for each month from 1981 to 2010. And then you've got your temperature in the lines here. So we've got red for max, yellow for average, blue for minimum. And so what you can do with the tool is you can look at today's. So this is for Grand Island as an example. So this is just the current 30-year normals, and then you can choose time periods in the future using higher and lower emission scenarios to see how these normals will change in the future. So here is higher emissions scenario through the end of the century for Grand Island. And so I'm just going to toggle these back and forth real quick so that you can see very quickly that the temperatures are rising, but the precipitation patterns are changing. Okay, and so you can do this for all of those locations like I had mentioned, and for different time periods. So you can do this in 10-year intervals all the way through the end of the century. And so that's a very quick way to kind of assess what your future conditions could be like. But I know that for a lot of people, and sometimes myself, these are just numbers. And so what do these actually mean? How do we start to imagine what our future climate would be like? Well, one way to do that is through what we call a sister city. And so this helps to put your projections into context. And so what you can do with this tool is you can select your location, and you can, by season, you can assess what location today is similar to your projected climate. And so in this example here, I chose Lincoln, and because we're in spring, I chose spring, and it turns out that under higher emissions scenario, we would be like Joplin, Missouri by the end of the century. And so you can see here, not only does it give you a map showing you where that location is, it shows you your current normal, your projected, and then also the normal of the location that is your sister city. And so I think that this really just helps put those numbers into context, because probably a lot of people have been to Joplin. Maybe you've been there in the spring. Maybe you know what that feels like. You could talk to folks in Joplin about what it's like to live there. You can actually start to have concrete examples of what that future climate could be like. And then one thing that we wanted to do was, we don't want to just leave it as the climate data alone. So what we did was, and Zhenghong is going to be talking about this quite a bit more, is we actually went through several planning documents and cataloged them for different planning strategies. And so someone could come to the site and, let's say they're interested in green infrastructure, or maybe how people are implementing, CO2 reduction strategies, or maybe green streets. There's a whole list of topics, and it will pull up plans that address that and take you directly to that part of the plan. So instead of having to read a 200-page plan and find the part that you're interested in, this tool will actually take you directly to that part so that you can start to learn from other communities and see what they're doing. So we have plans not only from this region, but also from across the country, ready to go to peruse. And so what are people saying? So we did actually test all these tools out back in the summer. So these tools have gone through several iterations to try to get them as close to final as possible. These tools are never final, though I'm sure it'll be improved for years to come. But folks are telling us that they'll use these for planning, that they'll use them to help validate decisions, and also to help communicate what's going on in the climate in their locations. And so that left us really hopeful that these tools could have an impact. So what do we do from here? Well, we have, since these have just now been released, you're going to get the first peek at them. There's still work to do later on down the road. Have these resources been effective in impacting planning and decision making? That's something that we could do a couple of years from now and see if these tools are having an impact. Maybe we can develop some best practices, refine the tools further. One thing to consider is, if this is a good model, can we expand these tools to include other cities and other regions? I think that we can. I think that the climate threshold development will be really key there, because the thresholds we use here in Nebraska probably not going to be the same ones that would be used in Miami. So, it'd be a different set of climatologists probably doing that work, and different set of resources, but I think it could be done if this proves to be a good model. And then also, maybe there's some other sectors that could benefit from similar resources, like fisheries and wildlife. So with that, I will leave my contact information up here. If you have any questions that we can't get to today at the panel, I'd be happy to take a phone call or an email from anybody, or you can stop by my office in Hardin Hall. Thanks so much.
Natalie, I don't know if you could hear that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. And we're just going to do that. I'm just going to close all that out.
Test.
So I don't screw it up. Okay. And you're going next, yes.
All right. Thank you, Tyler.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tarik Abdel-Monem. I'm with Public Policy Center. We're an applied research center here in Lincoln, and just like to open by thanking the folks with the State Climate Office, also with UNL Extension, Martha and Tyler, for putting together this event, and want to thank you as well. So I'm going to be very briefly reviewing some survey data that we obtained from municipalities in the Missouri River Basin area to inform our wider project. And at the outset, I'll tell you that, as some of you know, there are some caveats to survey data. Our survey was very broad in nature and really just sort of scratching the surface in some ways. But I think you'll find that some of the information that I present to you is pretty noteworthy because it provides sort of a snapshot or a regional milieu of where municipalities are in terms of use of climate data, attitudes towards climate change, and barriers to use of climate data. So the team of folks, that includes, of course, Martha, who's not here with us, Natalie, who you just heard from, Dr. Tang, Frank, and myself. We actually developed this survey. This is in the tail end of 2017, and we implemented it in the four-state area, the MINC area, Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. What we did is we actually identified every municipality in the four states with a population of 5,000 or over. That's 304 of them. Again, they're indicated here on the map. We sent our survey out to mayor's offices. In lieu of not having a mayor's office, we then sent it out to city managers' offices. We got a pretty good response rate of 39%. About 117 of those municipalities responded to our survey. Important to note that the vast majority of those respondents were what we refer to as micropolitans. These are communities of 50,000 or less. So one of the primary questions we were interested in knowing about is, to what extent were these municipalities currently using climate data in policy making? So this is obviously self-report data. We asked them this question, and we asked them to respond on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not at all, 5 being a great deal. And as you can see, the vast majority of the respondent communities were in that 1 to 2 range. So municipalities in this region just aren't using a whole lot of climate data. Obviously, we'd like to see these numbers bump up, basically see this curve flipped, but this is where we are currently. Who is using climate data? We're very interested in learning within municipalities what particular departments were most active in integrating climate data into policymaking activities. So again, we asked them another question, very wide-ranging, very broad strokes, but we asked them scale of 1 to 5. Again, 1 being not at all active, 5 being very active. To what extent were these particular departments actually using this data in planning activities? So you can see here that, again, if 3 is our midpoint, the vast majority of the departments, at least that were included among the municipalities that responded to us, aren't really using climate data very much. Number 1 user, Public Works and Utilities, then followed by Parks and Rec. But Public Works and Utilities only have 3.2 out of 5. Now this is really relevant here. I want to highlight mayor and city council down here. They were actually the categories that were least likely to use climate data in policymaking and planning. And the reason that's relevant, and some of you may know this if you're familiar with the literature, but there is a growing body of research in which people have been looking at local municipalities that have been developing and implementing fairly aggressive pro-climate policies. And there's somewhat of a consensus which suggests that those municipalities that do implement climate policy in an aggressive way have shared characteristics. And one of the major characteristics that they say drives this is actually the active involvement of these folks here, highly visible elected officials. That's probably for a variety of reasons. Obviously, if you're a mayor, you can sort of facilitate the use of climate data within departments, across departments, rather than siloed within sort of the typical areas. And also because you're in a highly visible public position, so you have that ability with your bully pulpit to interact with the public, your constituents, and sort of keep momentum alive within the community. So this is a take-home point, I think, for those of us who are active either in government or in the community as activists. As a follow-up to that, obviously we wanted to know, why aren't you using climate data? So we asked them, well, why aren't you using it? This was a categorical question, and the top earning vote here was lack of awareness about the value of doing so at 32%. This is relevant too, because as some of you may know, and again, I'm going to refer to some of the literature that's in the public administration area, environmental, et cetera. A lot of municipalities will tell you that the barriers to actively integrating climate data into municipal planning actually is lack of funding, lack of technical expertise. We see a lot of municipalities will say, well, we're obviously very aware of the predictive value of using climate data. We want to use climate data. We know that it's important to use, but we just don't have the funding. We've got 100 million other things to worry about, et cetera. So you typically will see a lot of municipalities saying lack of funding or lack of technical expertise is the biggest barrier to using climate data. But among our municipalities, lack of awareness. So that actually demonstrates sort of an awareness deficit among policymakers, at least in this four-state area. So that's another just important take-home, I think, for those of us who are either in municipal government or interact with municipal government as community activists or stakeholders. Issue framing. So we wanted to know among our respondents what they perceive to be the most effective way to promote or market climate adaptation or mitigation policies to their constituents. Again, this was a categorical question. I don't think this is much of a surprise here, but what we found is that the vast majority of our respondents indicated that they thought the best way was disaster extreme weather preparedness. A little surprised that health was so low, especially given our last session, but this is just where we are right now. Wanted to touch a little bit about attitudes towards climate change. And again, this is we're talking very broad strokes here. Some of you may be familiar with what's called the 6 Americas construct. And this is a construct that was put together some years ago by some academics at Yale and George Mason University to measure attitudes towards climate change on a spectrum ranging from dismissive all the way to alarmed. This data is actually from their most recent national sample, which they administered just last year. So this is where the nation as a whole stands. So you can see the vast majority of the nation is in the cautious to alarmed category. Now, if you're familiar with this data, you'll know that they actually have been administering this survey over the period of the last couple of years, actually I think a decade or so, or even further beyond that. And if you look back at this data maybe about 10 years ago, these these would have been a lot bigger right there. These circles would have been probably a lot smaller. So as a nation, we're actually moving more towards that recognition that yes, climate change is happening, and yes, I'm very concerned. So this is, again, is the nation. So we're kind of comparing apples to oranges here. By the way, this is the same data from the last slide, but it's just plotted on a line graph here. The response scale is actually flipped. So here we see alarmed, concerned over here, dismissive over there. But we wanted to know what our respondents felt in terms of levels of concern using the same construct. So these are actually the respondents to our survey. When I mean respondents, I mean the folks who actually literally completed our survey and sent it back to us. And you can see that there's a sort of a normal curve here. So there's a shift away from where the nation is towards more concerned and cautious. So again, these are the respondents to our survey. We then asked them to tell us, well, what do you think your fellow policymakers think about climate change? Where do you think they are within this spectrum? And that's represented here in the gray line, and you can see then a further shift towards the left there, towards dismissive. And then finally, we asked them where they thought that their constituents were within their communities. And that's the yellow line here. So you see just a further shift towards the doubtful, dismissive, disengaged. So I think that the take home here, I mean, there's two take homes. I mean, obviously, number one is, and again, we're talking apples and oranges here, but as far as the snapshot of folks that we had included within our survey, we see that clearly they're trending differently from where the nation is. So that's one thing that is just very noteworthy. But secondly, I think it suggests that policymakers themselves, at least in this 4-state area, they perhaps perceive that they don't have maybe the support from their constituents or from fellow policymakers. So again, for those of us who work in this area as municipal policymakers, if you're working in community activism, et cetera, I see some community activists out there already. This is a major take-home point. So with that, I'm going to leave it to my colleague, Dr. Tang. Again, this is a very broad overview of some of our survey data. We're continuing to look at the data hard. We're hoping to get some more detailed analysis out soon. As is the nature of survey data, you sort of lose the trees for the forest in some ways, but I think there's some interesting take-home points, and we can talk about some of these later in the Q&A period too. So thank you.
Hello, is it okay? Yeah, thank you everyone to stay long day in here. I think that shows that climate change is real. Huh? So I will appreciate the NOVA fund us for this project, and also a lot of the stakeholders to be involved in this project. So here, after Natalie give an overview about the project, and Tarik give a talk about from the mailing survey for the stakeholders. I will give a summary for the results that we evaluate all of the local comprehensive plans, the hazard mitigation plans, and the local emergency operational plans to see whether the planning document itself address the climate or extreme hazard issues in the officially approved documents. So that's a kind of scope of the work for us. So even we talk about the climate change or global warming, it's a global level or the large scale, but all of the sufferers happen at the local level. Like we happened this week in Lincoln, we have limited water, or a lot of the communities under the suffering of the flood at that time. So, however, whenever the climate change or the extreme hazards happen at the local level, local have some opportunities or have some of the powers to address or respond to the climate or climate-related issues. Like we have the regulation power from the land use planning, from the zoning, from the building code. One of my students finished this is 2 years ago, look about how well Nebraska communities think about the floodplain issues. Of course, the results, many of the community never mention any words about flood in the local comprehensive plans. And they are recently get some phone calls to dig in that project for some results. So the local they have the regulation power. They do have the information power as well. Like they share the information with the public. Like we couple of the previous talk about the health issue. That's exactly the role. It's local communities, local leaders to share the information with the general public as well as with some other agencies. And we also have the spending power. Where's the money put from? For the recovery after the disasters, we need to think about more strategically to put less building in the floodplain to try to avoid with that, or we just build anywhere in the infrastructure. So how can we invest our money? It's one of the issues. The taxation power. Nebraska will have the natural resource district. They have some of the taxation power that can get some revenues for them to allocate the resources or the projects. And acquisition power. Lincoln did an excellent job for the flood control because we have the wilderness park in the kind of west-southern parts in there. If without that open space or the conserved area, Lincoln probably flooded twice in the previous 3 or 5 years at that time. It's almost very close to the bridge level at that time. So we have the acquisition for power to try to purchase some of lands away from the disaster area or the risk area. Coordination power, we have the opportunity to work with the federal, state, or the NRD office, as well as with the horizontally with some other agency. So for my scope, I look about the local comprehensive plan. Local comprehensive plan is a kind of blueprint for everything. So all of other type of the local plans must be consistent with the local comprehensive plan. Otherwise, either they have to withdraw the project or have to make amendments to change or correct the local comprehensive plan or update, we use that word. So it's a big umbrella for zoning subdivision design standards. It's a guidance for the safe growth for the future. And as well as it's more important, it's a planning process to engage the stakeholders into the decision-maker process. It's not the planning document itself, okay? So hazard mitigation plan. I will give a short talk and leave that time to Mary. She worked in the NEMA for many years, and she approved all of the local hazard mitigation plans and for that. So I think the local comprehensive plan play a key role in the local planning system. I had delivered a talk last week in the Nebraska Planning and Zoning Association. A lot of the stakeholders, they never think about that, so we can use that avenue to engage some of the project for hazard mitigation. The emergency operations plan is a kind of emergency response document. Whenever we have any emergency happen, what should we do? That's a kind of procedural document at the local level. All of the local emergency operation office should have the similar procedures to address that. So I use a framework, look about like the factor base. Did you use any of the NOAA data set, projections, scenarios, whatever the NOAA spent $1 million produce that? Who are using that? I try to look up the local document, try to find the evidence for that. And also the historical extreme hazards. When we talk about the growth, like Lincoln or Omaha, do we think about the past lessons and the potential impact, like from the maybe the trend that Natalie presents about either the more severe weather, more changing conditions? Do we think about that? And do we have the vision? Second is, do we set up the goals and objective to prevent or reduce the risk? And do we think about work with other people to find a win-win situation rather than just stay in the silo by themselves? And then do you conduct some vertical collaboration with the federal, state, or up-level agencies? Or do you work with horizontally with your peers or colleagues at the city or county level at that time? Do you have the public awareness or outreach programs to address with that? Do you have an integrated planning mechanism? Let them join in a table, have a discussion to see how can we address the risk from the transportation, from the parks recreation, from the utility office. Also, let them work together. Do you have that kind of mechanism? And also for the policies, tools, strategies, think about the land use, building code, floodplain, ecosystem, water resource, infrastructure system. Do we have that, all kinds of the policies or tools to address that? The implementation, do we think about more adaptively for the implementation procedures? Or do we have the adaptation plans with that? Do we have a kind of steering committee or task force to address those kind of either climate or hazard related issues? Do you have an action plan? We know have some cities do have the action plan to address climate change, like the Kansas City. So this study address pick up the cities above 20,000, if I remember right, from the 4 states in the FEMA Region 7. And we collect the local comprehensive plan, local hazard mitigation plan, local emergency operations plan to see how well they address those kind of issues. So the result is not that beautiful. Overall, I think a hazard mitigation plan did a better job than the comprehensive plan and the local emergency operations plan. At the state level, if we look about the hazard mitigation plan, overall they are kind of in the medium or a little bit medium high, but comprehensive plan or local emergency operational plan, it's lots of variations among those kind of jurisdictions. Some cities have a better awareness, have a better integration, have a better planning for those kind of climate change or climate-related hazards or extreme hazards. Look about the 5 components. We can see at the local level, they do have a certain good or medium well level of policies, strategies. But normally they don't have a very strong factual base, or they are very disconnect with the NOAA system or the NOAA promoted system or the climate system. We don't have a many strong factual base. The goals are very minimal, or at least not prioritized at the local level compared to some daily operations. And the implementation is an issue. The coordination system is still there. That's an advantage for the policies and the coordination, but some other sections are not that well. So here's the conclusion for that. The hazard mitigation plan are leading the local climate or climate-related extreme hazards mitigation or adaptations. Local comprehensive plan and the emergency operational plan, they do partially address that kind of issue, but not good enough. The issue from that, we found the evidence from those 95 plan cities of the almost like 300 plans is those plans overall, they have a low awareness or recognition on the climate. Either we use a climate variability, climate change, or global warming, wherever we use that, low awareness, and the not very clear goal or not very prioritized the goal. No win-win set up that kind of multi-objective win-win goal were set in the local comprehensive plan or hazard mitigation plan or local emergency plan in there. the collaboration, but the good thing is the collaboration and the communication mechanism still available. Some policies in there, but there's no systematic integration among those kind of plans. The implementation always an issue as a local all kinds of planning system. So I was stopping here. The paper recently just published in the Natural Hazards Journal. I would say use this opportunity to appreciate the research team, as well as get a lot of support from Mary when she was the state hazard mitigation planner. She went to my class and gave me a lot of really good practice experience. I will save the time, give the time for Mary. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Tang. I really wanted to close this and mention some of what Frank wanted to say, because in his absence, he is the practitioner of this group that really put into practice kind of what they have done in the city of Lincoln in this area. So I just want to touch on that really quick. And for those of you that don't know Frank Ehrlich, let me just tell you what he's been doing and who he's about. He got his geological engineering degree from the Colorado School of Mines. He came to Lincoln in 2012. Since then, in August of 2015, Frank assumed the duties as the Mayor Beitler's sustainability coordinator. Under his tenure and direction, 5 subcommittees of the Mayor's Environmental Task Force developed the Lincoln Environmental Action Plan, called LEAP, and that was adopted by the City Council in December of 2017. Frank continues to work with the city staff and the task force to update and fully implement the LEAP plan. And so I just want to talk about a couple things that they've been doing. I do have his slides on my phone, and so I don't think it's going to hurt you to not be seeing them up here. So obviously, we know what the problem is. We've just experienced the problem this whole month, and we're still in the problem. We have these extreme events and things going on in our environment that we know are caused by events that we do have some control over. He wanted to talk about the last 3 floods for the city of Lincoln, which included the May of 2015 flood that was declared a natural disaster, a federal declaration, as well as the October 2014 event, and then even back as far to the 2012 droughts, where there were water restrictions imposed on the eastern end of the state for what seemingly was a drought on the western end of the state. So what is Lincoln really doing? They are really looking at, like I said, this LEAP team that they put into place, and really looking at their multi-agency support or their mitigation planning at all levels, departmental and emergency operation plans that they are making more robust that they have not done before. They have an incident command structure that's very robust. In fact, the city of Lincoln, Omaha, Lancaster County has a new emergency operations center now, and they're working on really doing some assess management systems within their group. Like I said, the LEAP plan is really focused on energy use, land use, transportation, and waste and water resources. Obviously, I wish he was here to talk more about the water resources and what Lincoln has recently went through. So for him, what he, I think, envisioned is what can we really do for climate data going into the future? They really envision integrating this into their comprehensive plan. As Dr. Tang just said, it's not done very well. We aren't doing very well at integrating climate change into our other planning mechanisms, and that's a shortfall that needs to be addressed. Also, his utility master plans, integrating the climate change effects into those so they are ready for the extreme event and how they're going to cope and adapt with that. And then the Lincoln Environmental Action Plan, and then also some long-range transportation plans. I think those of us that live in the city of Lincoln understand why that is important to the city. Also, there's a connection between climate change resiliency and asset management. How do they really use their assets? What's important? Where do they place their funding? And how do they take care of those resources appropriately? So what else can we do? Of course, state leadership is needed for structure and context for the local officials. If it's led from the state down, it seems to do better and get better traction. An energy policy, good energy policy for the state, good agricultural policy. And then he brought up LB 283. I'm going to assume this group is well familiar with that, LB 283, which is before our unicameral right now. There's some things in that bill that will hopefully get us a good action plan to the governor. I'm supposed to be to the governor by December 15th of 2020 related to the impacts from climate change to the state of Nebraska. So he wanted us to bring up that. At that point since we have two of them here, Natalie, are you still online or did you hung up? Okay, you hung up on Natalie. We're not asking Natalie anything. So you two are on the hot spot. So anything that you have for Tarik or Dr. Tang in questions, we'll take those now.
Hello. Okay, Tarik, you put up a slide that was talking about the 6 Americas. I was just curious, so the 6 Americas is averaged over the entire United States. Do you have information about the distribution in the communities that you were looking at, or you know, for example, the smaller communities especially, the greater respondents? I would expect that there's some shift there, but I don't know how big that would be.
Right. I think everyone heard that question. From what I understand, the 6 Americas is a random sample national survey, so I don't think that they have data at a statewide or local level. I can look into that. If you want to drop me your card, I can provide some more information though.
I do know that the Yale Climate Change Group has a bunch of data. I think that even breaks it down by county. Yeah, so you could, I can't remember what it's called, Yale Climate Change Group, something like that. Someone might know, but.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
Thank you. It's about the attempt to be helpful by pairing sister cities, whether you're comparing us to Joplin, or I've heard people say Oklahoma City or whatever. I think there's a fatal flaw there in the sense that while some of the temperatures will be similar, and it was an exercise worth doing, at the same time, I think we miss the sharp edge when we don't say, like Oklahoma City during the 1930s Dust Bowl. I think that gives it a very different flavor. And remembering the executive summary of the 2014 implications report, that's pretty much the prescription. We're headed for another Dust Bowl, only worse. And so if we say, well, like Oklahoma City or like Joplin, well, they're doing fine, aside from the occasional tornado. It's not that different from here, and you know, so if we change to be like them, no problem. But I think what I've heard today is it's a problem, so I think that's...
Natalie, I don't know if you'd like to respond. You're onto something there, because as you know, there's a lot of cognitive modeling research which shows that your attitude towards climate change is impacted by recent memory. So those folks who just experienced a flood or whatnot, a drought, they're going to be more inclined to most likely be supportive of pro-climate policies. So good point.
Yes, I have a question about smart cities. So do you see much activity in Nebraska of some of these medium-sized communities trying to use technology to be more sustainable and resilient? And what cities, maybe even around the country, would you see as benchmarks of how to do this well?
I'll take a stab at that. I can certainly forward you some information if you want to drop me your contact information after this. I'm familiar with some of the literature, again, which looks at characteristics among cities that are very aggressive in terms of implementing pro-climate policies. That includes smart city policies, it includes incentives, it includes certainly the city of Lincoln has done some very proactive things as well. There are plenty of types of incentive opportunities out there, as well as on the state level, as well as on the federal level, when you look at Energy Star and so on. I don't want to get into like identifying particular cities now, I think, because there's just a lot out there. But I just think it's important to note again, getting back to the leadership issue, how key leadership is. And there's that saying, if you call from the top of a mountain, your voice will be heard. We really need active leadership in this issue. It's clearly important when it comes to facilitating proactive climate policy within municipalities and within the public. Some of the literature that I'm familiar with indicates that in addition to the active involvement of a mayor, city council, having a dedicated staff person or persons who have the sort of technical or policy expertise or background to implement smart city policies is also key. A third major factor, of course, is public involvement, having a very active community group. There are other factors as well too, partnership with universities, K through 12 institutions, et cetera, et cetera. So I can identify some of that information and literature and forward that to you if you'd like.
I just add one more comments on that. Like City of Boulder is one of a good example that strictly control the growth boundary and also try to away with the floodplain, even they were flood a couple of years ago again. But some cities are really more aggressive and proactive to doing this kind of hazard mitigation from the risk reduction. That's Mary believe that's in heart. So I just add this point in there.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys.